one of the most bizarre conspiracy theories I've ever seen. Where does Rohit bat?
And India are just going to dominate them.
Some of the bowling decisions that Australia used was absolutely hilarious, by the way. Welcome to Following on India. I'm Jarrod, Kimber. I also have Saurabh, Somani. We're here on the talkSPORT YouTube cricket channel. And you can find us. You can find us anywhere. You can find Saurabh in Pondicherry probably picking up broken trees from the cyclone that he had to endure the other day. I'm in London. Not as many cyclones here of recent times. But talking about a cyclone, come on, Saurabh, let's just start with this. Surely you think now India can win 5-0. Put your money on the table.
No, I'm not putting my money on 5-0. 5-0, like in stock terms, that would be investing in a really, really risky small cap stock that 99 times out of 100 has gone kaput. So I might put 1% of my money on 5-0, but yeah, that's all I'm going to go with. Well,
would you say there are people within India, though, that are starting to look at 5-0 as a potential?
I'm sure there are. I actually have seen, this is by a very unscientific method of social media sampling, that I've seen people have these takes, that, now Australia is just on a downward turn and India are just going to dominate them and we are going to keep winning because you think Jasprit Bumrah is going to continue bowling like Jasprit Bumrah, which is actually the most reasonable assumption out of all of those things, that Bumrah will be Bumrah. But, if you think that the Australian bowlers will continuously be as off color as they were in the second innings, especially in Perth, or that the batting will continue to fail in this manner, or that the support around Bumrah will continue and that the form of India's batsmen will continue uninterrupted, which is what you need for 5-0. That I think is, too many things, too many Swiss cheese holes need to align for that to happen.
A lot of Swiss cheese holes. So first thing is that at the moment, India is in much better form than Australia. You would assume that at one stage Australia is going to find some form in this competition, right? So that's one thing. One thing I would say is that right at the moment, India can improve their 11 and Australia can't. So that's another thing in favour of India from that point of view. We'll talk about the day-night thing later on, but you've got Kohli, Siraj and Jaiswal, I would all say, have probably outperformed what our expectations were of them so far. And with Jaiswal, we weren't sure. With Siraj, there'd been a question mark over him for quite some time. And with Kohli, of course, he'd been struggling forever, right? So there's certainly an element of all those things. So Australia doesn't have a top three unless Sam Constas comes in after his 100 in the PM's 11, but that was basically a limited overs game, so I don't even know how we even are interested in that or in any way. Any team where, Devdutt Padikkal batted at number 9, I'm not sure we could take a lot out of that. So let's assume Australia's top 3 isn't going to get all that much better. So you look at all those things, and then I think the most important thing is that Australia's best bowler, and not by a little bit, but by a lot in that last test match, was Josh Hazlewood. He is injured, or according to Border Gavaskar, has been dropped in one of the most bizarre conspiracy theories I've ever seen. I'm not really sure. Border Gavaskar's like, look, he said this thing at his press conference. He was clearly dropped. And it's like, I don't think they're going to drop Josh Hazlewood. They're pretty used to Josh Hazlewood saying pretty straightforward things. That's what Josh Hazlewood does. There's a lot of things that are going in India's favour. I'm not saying 5-0, but you look at it and there are a huge amount of things that are going towards India here and not a huge amount of things that are going towards Australia.
Josh Hazlewood is certainly, a huge miss, I would imagine. But do they have the closest replacement possible in Scott Boland? What do you think? Because he has an insane record in Australia, so they might not. Are they really that much worse off?
I mean, I don't know if he's exactly a like for like, because he's a slightly different kind of bowler. But you're right, he's not a million miles away from Hazlewood. I think the problem they have is he's only played I think this was the PM's 11 was his third game. The only reason he played that game is because he hadn't been playing any cricket, right? So I think there's a huge element there of they just had to get him to play. And so if that's the case, then they're already in problems. I know he bowled 10 overs, so I don't think they're too worried about the amount of overs he bowled or anything else there. But yes, you're right. I think they can cover him. However, the form that Hazelwood is in, Scott Boland isn't going to be able to cover that, is he? Like Josh Hazelwood's been averaging like 13 this year or something ridiculous, right? And he looked brilliant in Perth, and being able to cover that is not easy. Like India, much happy going into a Test match without Josh Hazelwood than any of the other
Definitely.
seamers, I reckon.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. I mean, the only thing that we learned from that PM's 11 match, which turned into a one-day match, was what would have been a hot take after the first test ended, but is now maybe a much colder take, that India might actually be leaning towards not breaking up their opening combination, because this is the only pink ball max situation that they have before Adelaide, and they sent Rahul and Jaiswal to open. So how much should we read into that? Like, I thought we should read a little bit into that Rohit didn't come out to open, that he came at number 4. So I would lean now more towards Jaiswal and Rahul opening, even though during the first test, despite how successful they had been, I thought, no, they're not going to change stuff overnight. This is India. But given this, I would say that. What do you think? Do you think they'll go that way, or would it be the right move to not break up the opening partnership?
I think it's fascinating. So you flagged this early on in the last test where you were talking about this, and we both talked about it, and we're like, yeah, we can understand why you might do it and everything else. But then we also thought there's no way they're going to do it, right? That was our first thought was. In fact, I did a podcast like a day ago, and I was saying the same thing. It's a good idea, and it won't happen. And then, of course, it happens in the PM's 11, and we're suddenly like, okay, where does Rohit bat?
At 5.
You bat him at 5.
No. And the interesting thing is, let's say India are 3 down, and they really feel like they need to send a left-hander to disrupt whatever rhythm is going on there. So then you could have Rishabh Pant coming in at 5, and does Rohit go back to number 6? That's where he made his test debut. He scored 2 centuries in 2 tests on debut during Sachin Tendulkar's farewell series. So, it's like full circle. He might come at 6, but I expect him to be slotted in at 5 if he's not opening.
So here's my theory. I think what happened to Rohit Sharma is a similar thing that happened to Shane Watson, which is when they finally worked out how to bat, the only spot that was available was opening, and so they came back in and they opened. And then they made a lot of runs, so everyone goes, "Oh, they're an opener." Whereas actually, I think Shane Watson probably would have had a much better career if he'd come back in and batted number 5 or number 6. I don't think that's quite the case with Rohit. I think it could go either way. But there's nothing within me that thinks he's going to fail if he comes back in down the order. What is interesting, though, is they are maximising their batting, right? Because we know that if KL Rahul is definitely going to play, we know he's much better at the top of the order than he is anywhere else. So I can understand it from that perspective. But I'm with you. It doesn't seem like the most natural thing for Indian cricket to suddenly make a change this drastic at this stage.
Yeah, it doesn't. But thinking about it from the pink ball test point of view also, because we know how, the pink ball behaves differently to the red ball. The sessions behave differently. Batting under twilight becomes a thing, where maybe those opening batting skills that he has developed over the 5 years will come in handy actually lower down the order, especially if you have a new guy walking in then. It might as well be Rohit rather than anyone else who has a history of opening. And in the last 5 years, before his recent little bit downturn of form, he has done really well also on tough pitches against deep bowling attacks, tough bowling attacks. He's done well. So, it might actually serve that purpose also for India to give insurance in the twilight session, in the last session of the day.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. Well, let's get on to the day-night game. Obviously, it was a little, the warm-up game didn't tell us all that much. I'm not sure if Matt Renshaw is going to come in and suddenly take the wicket of Ravi Jadeja in a test match. Some of the bowling decisions that Australia used that Prime Minister's 11 was absolutely hilarious, by the way. But let's talk about the day-night. Australia has been absolutely brutal in home day-night matches right up until they lost the last one. In fact, I would say the 2 that they have struggled the most in have been at the Gabba. When they've been at Adelaide, they've been absolutely on fire. If Australia win this first test, it probably could have ruined the series because they would have taken that confidence into the second test, and in Adelaide, they probably would have got over the line. It's a lot more up in the air now with no Hazelwood. We'll get to the whole Mitch Marsh thing as well in a moment and everything else. No top order and all this. We know that essentially day-night test matches, especially in Australia, are bowling test matches. and the averages come way down. It's very hard to bat in the first session. It's very hard to bat in the third session. In the middle session, everyone seems to be okay and make some good runs. What do you see as is this something that could be toss dependent? Could it be conditions dependent? Is India happy that this is now going to be a shootout test, or would they prefer it to be maybe being played in Melbourne, Brisbane, or Sydney before the Adelaide game?
I think from India's point of view, this is actually great timing. They've just won unexpectedly in Perth. Going into Perth, not many expected them to win, and they've just sort of demolished Australia there. They have now got the advantage of an Australian attack without Hazelwood. So, given everything the way it has aligned, I don't think they'd be too upset about the day-night test coming now. But as for conditions, toss, I don't even know. The toss didn't even seem that dependent in Perth, because India got bowled out and then Australia also got bowled out. And in a day-night test especially, you never know. It so much depends on when you come into bat and how set you are when the ball starts doing funny things. So, and that depends on how the flow of the game goes. And you can't plan that. So it's very, dependent on you just to use the most boring cliche that cricketers use, like sticking to the basics and putting it in the right areas and taking it one ball at a time sort of thing. But it is sort of in essence, it boils down to that in a day-night test in Adelaide with two, great bowling attacks. Australia is still a great bowling attack, even without Hazelwood, with, Cummins, you don't expect Cummins to be as off-colour as he was in Perth. Mitchell Starc was in good rhythm. Scott Boland has shown what he can do in Australia. So it's not as if, suddenly you can turn up and, Australia's bowling is there for the taking. And India's bowling attack, of course, any bowling attack that has Bumrah in it is great. And Bumrah with good support is really awesome. So it's so dependent on how the match flows. So I don't know how much the toss will play a role. Like, you could say that the toss plays a role if the batting really takes off and you bat for 5 sessions and then you stick the team in and the last session on day 2, then you would have really maximized the toss advantage. But barring that, I think it's difficult. And is it, even feasible to bat 5 sessions against these bowling attacks? I don't know.
Well, I think the average on the pink ball test is like 25 as well. So it's not that it's not that likely that anyone's going to make a lot of runs. I don't think it's as toss dependent. I think it's more conditions dependent. Like, you just could be in at a certain time of the game where it's very hard to bat. And I think we will see that a couple of times throughout this. So there will be a chance there. Mitchell Starc, should also be reminded, is basically 2 different bowlers in day-night test cricket than he is in normal test cricket. Like, I don't think people quite understand just how brilliant he has been. And Mitchell Starc's career as a test cricketer has been, I wouldn't say carried, but what's the best way? Massaged by his day-night numbers over the last couple of years. So in day test matches in his career, he averaged 29.9. In day-night test matches, 12 of them, he has taken 66 wickets at an average of 18.7. So essentially, in day-night conditions, Mitchell Starc is Jasprit Bumrah.
Yes, that's what I was thinking too. So he becomes Bumrah when there's a pink ball. But yeah, and he was actually in good rhythm in Perth. Maybe he didn't have the wickets to show for it. So an in-rhythm Mitchell Starc coming to a pink ball test, it's definitely not going to be easy for India.
Okay, are you at all worried about the new Garfield Sobers Bo Webster?
Who wouldn't be? If you have to face Garfield Sobers, you have to be worried. You can't not be. But does he bowl off spin or leg spin?
He used to bowl off spin, and I think he bowls mainly medium pace. Oh, not medium pace. He kind of a bit slingy, isn't he? His action. I don't think he'll play. By the way, we've seen more. We might see more Bo Webster content in the next couple of days than we've ever seen in his entire career. Outside of that time when he took all those wickets and destroyed, was it New South Wales or Tasmania? Whoever, Western Australia actually, it might have been. We've seen more Bo Webster content, but it now looks like Mitchell Marsh is fit anyway, and so that Mitch Marsh is going to play. Not only that, they talk about Mitch Marsh being able to bowl. So he goes from not being able to play at all to being able to bowl. So what an incredible turnaround it has been for Mitch Marsh over the last couple of days. Couple of other things that I thought was quite interesting here is what does India do with Jasprit Bumrah? Obviously, he's played in the first test. Obviously, he will play in the second test. How do they look at the next 3 tests after that? Is there one that they are going to rest him for? Or is it, especially with the England series, I wouldn't say coming up, but there's an England series, there's a Champions Trophy, he's got a long IPL season ahead of him, all these things. Do they worry about resting him, or do they just press the foot to the pedal and hope he makes it to the end?
I think a lot of that will just depend on Jasprit Bumrah himself. It depends on how he's feeling. He has shown he's a highly, highly intelligent person. And he knows his bowling. If he knows his body as well as knows his bowling, you'll trust him to make that call. That whether he feels the need to ease off for one test, then maybe he just sits out. And so much of it might also depend on whether, Mohammad Shami comes back. We were all thinking there's a long break between the first and second test. Fly him in. Shami is still playing the Syed Mushtaq Ali Trophy in India. Maybe he will come at some point, hopefully. If he does, it gives India a little bit of added, insurance that, okay, maybe if Bumrah needs a rest, we can, without making the bowling attack look like it's orphaned. So that depends on Bumrah, I think, alone. And I think if he can, he's going to play all 5 tests. It would be a bonus, let's say. If he plays all 5 tests, it would be a bonus because nobody really expected him to be available for the full series. Not because he didn't want to. I think he wants to play as much as he can, whenever he can. But the nature of fast bowling is such, and the nature of Bumrah's bowling is such that, you count yourself lucky if you have an extended injury-free session. I think that's what it'll boil down to, whether Bumrah feels it or he doesn't.
So we started off with you talking about Indian fans thinking about 5-0 and everything else. Can I tell you where Australian fans are? Every time I've talked to an Australian in the last week or so, I've been told to say, it's time to stop. The Australian fans have got to a point, and this is even kind of before Hazelwood was injured and Mitch Marsh, maybe they knew about Mitch Marsh, but maybe not Hazelwood. There's come to a point where this no. This is the transition period. We need to hit the button and bring. They want Constas in. They want the young seamers to be given a go. All these different things are happening. So that all changes if Australia win this next test, right? Everything there changes, and we have seen recently. I think we all thought that the Bengaluru test between New Zealand and India was an outlier, and then it wasn't. So that's made us think that these things we have to really trust them. But realistically, we're seeing massive swings within test matches and within test series. We just saw Bangladesh play really poorly against the West Indies, start the second test by not making many runs, and then win easily against the West Indies, right? We're seeing these massive swings. We saw Sri Lanka do really well for about a day against South Africa, and then not even come out to bat in their first innings, right? All these sorts of things are happening over and over again. New Zealand put themselves in a really good position that ended up somehow with a massive deficit on their first. We have no idea what is about to happen here. And this is the day-night tests in Adelaide are some of the most random when it comes to, the conditions, the low scoring and everything else. It really is like we're just pressing shuffle mode on Test cricket at the moment, and we're going to see what comes from it.
I love that description. Shuffle mode on Test cricket. That's how 2024 will go down as.
Yeah, it won't. I mean, there's no other way of looking at it. So we will be back at the end of every day's play here on Following on India on the talkSPORT YouTube channel. You can find us there. You can find us on all the various social medias as well. We're everywhere, as cricket media often is. And so we'll be back after Stumps on day 1 here on talkSPORT's YouTube cricket channel.